When a school bus driver spots a little girl running frantically toward his bus, he assumes she's just running late. But when she climbs aboard and reveals the frightening reason for her hurry, his face pales, and he realizes he must act quickly before we jump into the story. Let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you believe in standing up for those in need. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It was a chilly morning, the kind that wrapped the quiet suburban streets in a frosty embrace. Sam P. was driving the yellow school bus along its usual route. The engine hummed rhythmically, filling the otherwise peaceful neighborhood, with only the gentle rustle of leaves breaking the silence. Sam, a reliable man in his late 40s, had a kind face framed by streaks of gray in his dark hair. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. It felt like an ordinary morning. At least, that's what he thought as the bus rounded a curve. Something caught Sam's eye in the side mirror. A small figure was sprinting down the street, her coat flapping behind her like wings. Sam squinted and quickly recognized her as Delilah Carter, one of the quieter girls on his road. Her frantic pace and waving arms interrupted the usual rhythm of his thoughts, and he brought the bus to a stop. Sam watched as Delilah reached the side of the bus, banging on the door with her tiny fists. Her cheeks were flushed, and tears streamed down her face. Something was terribly wrong. He opened the door, his voice calm but filled with concern. "Delilah, what's going on?" The 8-year-old stumbled up the steps, her breaths coming in sharp gasps. Her trembling hands gripped the straps of her oversized backpack, and her tearful eyes darted nervously back toward her modest house. "Please," she stammered, her voice shaking. "Don't leave me. I need help." Sam quickly parked the bus and knelt down to her level. "Delilah, slow down," he said gently, his steady tone hiding the unease bubbling in his chest. "You're safe here. Just tell me what's wrong." Delilah's chest heaved as she struggled to find the words. "I can't go back there," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He said he'd hurt me if I told anyone." Sam's jaw tightened as a chill ran through him. Her small frame shook with fear, and he noticed the bruises on her wrists, barely visible beneath her coat sleeves. Kneeling down to meet her gaze, he placed his weathered hands gently on her shoulders. "Delilah, listen to me. You're safe now. No one will hurt you while you're with me, but I need you to tell me who's trying to hurt you." Her lips quivered, and she shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't. They'll know I told." Sam's heart broke at her words, but he kept his voice steady. "You did the right thing by coming to me. You're not alone in this, okay, I promise." After a moment of hesitation, Delilah nodded, wiping her nose on her sleeve. Sam guided her to the front seat. "Stay right here," he said softly. "I need to make a call." Leaving the bus engine off, Sam grabbed his phone and called the school counselor, Miss Hall. She answered almost immediately, her tone turning serious as Sam explained the situation. "Delilah's been on my radar for a while," Miss Hall admitted. "She's been withdrawn lately, but nothing pointed to this. I'll call Child Protective Services right now. In the meantime, don't leave her side." "Understood," Sam replied, glancing at Delilah, who sat huddled in the front seat with her knees drawn up to her chest. After he finished the morning route, Sam parked the bus at the school. Miss Hall met him at the entrance, her expression grave. Together, they gently coaxed Delilah into her office, where the girl clung tightly to Sam's arm, refusing to let go. "Please don't make me go back," she whispered. Miss Hall knelt beside her, speaking softly but firmly. "Delilah, we're here to help you. You're very brave for speaking up. We just need to know a little more so we can keep you safe." But Delilah shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Sam crouched beside her again. "You've already been brave, Delilah. You don't have to face this alone anymore." The sincerity in his voice seemed to reach her. She nodded hesitantly but didn't loosen her grip on his sleeve. When the CBS caseworker arrived, the atmosphere felt heavier. Delilah's fear reignited as the woman introduced herself. "Delilah, I'm here to help you," she said gently. "I'll take you to a safe place where no one can hurt you." "No," Delilah cried, wrapping her arms around Sam's waist. "Please don't make me go. I want to stay with you." Sam's throat tightened, but he knew he couldn't promise what wasn't his to give. He knelt down, holding her hands, his voice firm yet kind. "Delilah, I can't go with you, but I'll make sure you're safe. I'll be here, and I'll check on you, I promise." Her wide, tearful eyes searched his face for reassurance. Finally, she let go reluctantly, taking the caseworker's hand as they walked away. Delilah glanced back, her small face a mix of fear and hope. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the small, neatly organized office as Miss Hall adjusted her glasses and glanced toward Sam and the CBS caseworker, Lord Jenkins. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on all of them, but it was Miss Hall who broke the silence, her voice tinged with regret. I should have seen it earlier, she admitted, clasping her hands tightly. Delilah has been so withdrawn these past few months. She comes in late, always tired, and sometimes her clothes look unkempt. I noticed little things, scrapes, bruises, but she always had a quick excuse. I fell off my bike or I tripped at the park. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Sam, seated nearby in his slightly wrinkled bus driver uniform after a long day, leaned forward. You couldn't have known, he said gently. Kids are good at hiding things when they're scared. Laura Jenkins, a woman in her late 40s with a no-nonsense attitude, tapped her pen against a notepad. Her sharp eyes scanned the room as she spoke. It's common in cases like this. The abuser instills fear, making them think that speaking up will only make things worse. That's why it's critical we handle this carefully. Sam glanced at Delilah, who sat in the corner of the office. Her small hands clutched a warm cup of cocoa, and she seemed lost in the oversized chair, her eyes darting between them like a frightened animal. Every now and then, her gaze flitted to the door, as if she expected it to burst open at any moment. Laura approached Delilah with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to delicate situations. She crouched down to the girl's level, her tone soft yet deliberate. Delilah, can you tell me about home? We're here to help you. No one will hurt you, I promise. Delilah shrank further into the chair, her fingers tightening around the cocoa cup. She stared at the floor, her lips pressed tightly together. Delilah, Sam said, his voice steady but warm. Remember what you told me this morning? That you wanted help? We're all here to make sure you're safe. Her small frame shook slightly as she whispered, he said. He said if I told anyone, he'd find me. The room fell silent. Laura exchanged a glance with Miss Hall, and then jotted something down in her notebook. Who? Laura pressed gently. Your dad. Delilah didn't answer, but her trembling nod was enough. Laura straightened, her professional demeanor slipping just enough to reveal a flash of anger. Okay, she said firmly. Delilah, you won't be going back there tonight. We're going to find a safe place for you, no. Delilah cried, her voice breaking. He'll come for me. He said he would. Sam moved to her side, kneeling so that their eyes met. Listen to me, Delilah. Nobody's going to let that happen. Not Miss Hall, not Laura, and not me. Do you believe me? Delilah hesitated, her wide eyes searching his face. Finally, she gave a small nod. Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sam found himself driving through Delilah's neighborhood. The image of her tear-streaked face and trembling hands replayed in his mind like a broken record. Something about her fear felt deeper than what was visible, hinting at a darkness far worse than they had imagined. As he passed the Carter house, a modest two-story home with a neglected lawn, Sam spotted movement in the driveway. Squinting through the dim light, he recognized Todd Carter. The man's broad frame was hunched as he struggled to fit a heavy duffel bag into the trunk of his car. Even from a distance, Todd's agitated movements were clear. His head darted around, and his shoulders were tense. Sam slowed the vehicle and parked at a discreet distance, watching as Todd slammed the trunk shut and wiped his hands on his jeans. The man glanced over his shoulder twice before heading back toward the house. The sight sent a chill down Sam's spine. His instincts, honed from years of working with people, told him something wasn't right. But he wasn't a cop. He couldn't just barge in and demand answers. Instead, he pulled out his phone and dialed Detective Mike Anders, an old family friend. Mike picked up on the second ring. Sam, what's up? I need your help, Sam said, his tone urgent. It's one of the kids on my route. Her name's Delilah Carter. She came to me this morning, terrified, saying her dad threatened her. CPS is involved now, but I just saw him loading a huge duffel bag into his car. He looked off. Mike's voice turned serious. Did you see where he went? No, but he's back in the house now. I didn't want to approach him without backup. Good call, Mike replied. I'll run his name through the system and see if anything comes up. If CPS is involved, they'll need anything we can dig up. Thanks, Mike, Sam said. I just want to make sure that little girl's safe. You did the right thing, Sam, Mike assured him. I'll keep you posted. The next day, Laura Jenkins arrived at the Carter home, her footsteps firm as she approached the front door. The Carter house stood in quiet defiance against the dimming twilight, its curtains drawn tightly and its exterior freshly painted, as if trying to present an image of perfection. With her clipboard in hand, Laura squared her shoulders as she approached the front steps. The earlier tension with Todd Carter lingered in her mind, sharpening her instincts as she prepared for another confrontation. This time, she resolved to dig deeper. Todd answered the door almost immediately. A strained smile stretched across his face. Can I help you? He asked, his tone wavering between forced politeness and thinly veiled irritation. Mr. Carter, "I'm Laura Jenkins with Child Protective Services," she said, flashing her badge. "I'm here to talk to you about Delilah." Laura replied evenly, stepping into the house without waiting for an invitation. Her practiced eyes scanned the living room. It was immaculate, with a strong chemical smell of bleach hum in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Todd gestured toward the couch. "I already spoke to the school. Delilah is fine. There's nothing to worry about, but please come in and make yourself at home." Laura ignored his attempt at charm, focusing instead on the details that didn't quite add up. The carpet looked freshly shampooed, its dampness faintly visible under the lamp light. On a side table, a pile of framed photos stood conspicuously tidy, as if hastily arranged. She picked up one of the frames, a picture of Todd, Delilah, and a woman she assumed was Sarah. "That's my wife," Todd said, his voice tightening slightly. "Well, ex-wife now. She left us about a year ago. It's been tough on Delilah." "Delilah mentioned her mother earlier," Laura said, setting the frame down carefully. She seemed upset. Todd shrugged, leaning against the doorway. "What kid wouldn't be?" "Sarah walked out on us without a second thought. I've been doing my best to hold things together, but you know how it is." Laura nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "You said earlier that Delilah has been struggling. Can you elaborate?" Todd's demeanor shifted, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "She's 8 years old. She's bound to have some bad days. Kids fall, they get upset, they say things they don't mean. And the injuries?" Laura pressed, her tone firm but not confrontational. "Accidents," Todd replied quickly. "She's clumsy, always has been. Fell off her bike last week and scraped her knee. You know how kids are." Laura let the silence stretch, watching as Todd's discomfort grew. She glanced toward the kitchen, where a faint outline of a mop leaned against the counter, the bucket beside it filled with murky water. Her attention shifted to a door at the far end of the hallway. "What's down there?" she asked, motioning toward it. Todd stiffened. "The basement. Just storage, old furniture, tools, that sort of thing." "Would you mind if I had a look?" Laura asked, stepping toward the door. Todd moved quickly, blocking her path. "There's nothing down there worth seeing," he said, his tone sharp now. "Like I said, just storage." Laura took a step back, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. She made a mental note, but didn't push further. Forcing the issue would jeopardize her credibility and escalate the situation unnecessarily. Instead, she adjusted her approach. "Understood," she said smoothly. "Thank you for answering my questions. I'll be in touch." Todd's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his gaze remained cautious as he opened the door for her to leave. "Have a nice day," he replied, his voice sounding hollow. Later that evening, Sam Porter sat across from Detective Mike Anders at a small diner on the edge of town. The coffee in front of him had gone cold and untouched as he recounted everything he had seen and heard over the past 2 days. "There's something wrong in that house, Mike," Sam said, his voice low but urgent. "That girl didn't just make this up." Anders, a seasoned detective with a constantly furrowed brow, leaned back in his chair. "You're not the first person to raise concerns about Todd Carter," he admitted, tapping a pen against his notebook. 2 years ago, neighbors called in reports of shouting and banging. When officers arrived, Todd claimed it was an argument with his wife, and she backed him up. No charges were filed. Sam frowned. "What about Delilah? Was she there?" "She was, but nothing pointed to her being in danger, at least not back then," Anders said. He flipped through his notes and added, "Todd also has a sealed record, an assault charge from his early 20s. He avoided jail by completing anger management classes." Sam's jaw tightened. "That doesn't sound like someone who should be raising a child alone." Anders sighed. "It's not enough to act on. Suspicion doesn't hold up in court. Then what will?" Sam demanded. "Are we waiting for something worse to happen?" Anders raised a hand to calm him. "We're not ignoring this. We have to follow procedure. CPS is involved, and Laura Jenkins knows what she's doing. If there's enough evidence, we'll get a warrant." Sam leaned back, frustration etched on his face. "I just don't want to see that girl slip through the cracks." At her office, Laura typed up her report, the faint ache in her temples growing as she recounted the day's events. She detailed Todd's evasiveness, the lingering smell of bleach, and the locked basement door. Each detail painted a picture of a man with something to hide. She paused, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen. Her gut told her that Delilah's life depended on what came next. With a steadying breath, she finalized her report and sent it to her supervisor, including a formal request for a warrant to search the Carter home. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a message from a colleague. It was a brief update. Todd Carter had requested a meeting with CPS tomorrow to discuss Delilah's case. Laura's unease deepened. She had seen this tactic before, a calculated move by abusers to regain control of the narrative. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, the weight of the case pressing heavily on her shoulders. After Laura filed her report, citing the suspicious circumstances surrounding her visit to the Carter home, Detective Anders reviewed her findings alongside the growing concerns about Todd's behavior. The unsettling evidence, a history of domestic disturbances, Sarah Carter's unexplained disappearance, and Delilah's cryptic comments prompted Anders to push for a search warrant. By the following morning, the warrant was approved. Laura and Anders coordinated with the precinct, assembling a team to execute the search. The morning was heavy with tension as the police convoy pulled into the quiet street where the Carter home stood. Laura Jenkins stepped out of her car, clutching her clipboard tightly. Detective Mike Anders was beside her, his expression hard with focus. Officers, armed with the warrant and dressed for the operation, moved briskly toward the house. Laura adjusted her jacket against the cool breeze that bit at her skin. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she suspected lay ahead. The unease from the previous night had only grown after filing a report, and now that the warrant was approved, it was time to act. Todd Carter was already on the porch when the first officer knocked sharply on the door. His expression darkened as Laura and Anders approached. "What the hell is this?" Todd barked, crossing his arms to block the doorway. His usually polished demeanor had vanished, replaced by visible anger. "We have a warrant to search the premises, Mr. Carter," Anders said, holding up the document. His tone was calm but firm. Todd snatched the paper, scanning it quickly before glaring at Laura. "This is harassment. I've done nothing wrong. We're just following protocol," Laura said evenly. "Please step aside so we can proceed." Todd hesitated, his jaw tightening, but eventually stepped back into the house. "Fine, but don't think you'll find anything, because there's nothing to find." The house was as pristine as Laura remembered, its meticulous order giving the unsettling impression of a stage set for appearances instead of a lived-in home. Officers moved efficiently, opening drawers, checking closets, and photographing every corner. The smell of bleach still lingered faintly in the air, a reminder of the hasty cleanup Laura had noted during her last visit. Todd trailed behind them, muttering under his breath, "You people are unbelievable. My daughter's been taken, and this is how you help." Laura ignored his complaints, her attention drawn to the basement door. An officer stood by, waiting for Anders' nod before unlocking it. Todd's protests grew louder. "You're wasting your time down there," he snapped, his voice rising. "It's just tools and junk." Anders shot him a pointed look. "Let us decide that." The basement was dimly lit, with a single bulb casting long shadows across the room. Boxes and old furniture were stacked haphazardly, but it didn't take long for the officers to find the first red flag. A loose panel on the wall revealed a hidden compartment. Laura's stomach churned as an officer pulled out a small bundle of items wrapped in cloth. As he unwrapped it, he revealed blood-stained rags, a broken child's bracelet, and several crumpled pieces of paper. Laura took a closer look at the papers, her breath catching as she realized there were drawings, crudely rendered but unmistakably disturbing. Dark figures loomed over a small child in every sketch. "Document everything," Anders instructed, his voice tight. He turned to Laura, his expression grim. "This isn't looking good." Laura nodded, forcing herself to remain composed. "Let's keep going," she said, leading them further into the basement. A locked closet drew their attention. Todd, who had followed them down, stepped forward, his agitation mounting. "You have no right to go through that," he said, his voice teetering on the edge of control. "We have every right," Anders shot back, motioning for the lock to be cut. Todd's protests grew louder as the closet was opened, revealing a duffel bag ominously sitting on a shelf. Inside the bag were items that made Laura's heart sink. Sarah Carter's driver's license, credit cards, and personal effects, including a tattered scarf. Laura recognized the items from one of the photos displayed in the living room. Anders held them up for Todd to see. "Care to explain why these are hidden in a bag in your basement?" Todd's face twisted in anger. "That's none of your business. Sarah left them behind when she ran off. She didn't care about this family, and now you're dragging her into this mess. You've been holding on to her things for over a year." "Hidden in a locked closet?" Laura asked, her tone sharp. Todd's gaze darted away, his jaw working as he stammered. "Seriously, I didn't know they were down here. She must have left them when she moved her stuff." Before Laura could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from above. Todd's lawyer, a sharply dressed man with an air of smug confidence, descended the stairs. "All right, that's enough," the lawyer said, his tone clipped. "This search is over." Anders stepped forward, unfazed. We have a warrant, and we're not finished. You found what you're going to find, the lawyer countered, his voice cold. Any further actions will be viewed as harassment, and I'll make sure my client's rights are protected. Anders stared him down for a long moment before nodding to his team. Document everything and wrap it up. Back upstairs, Laura stood by the front door, her thoughts racing. Todd leaned against the wall, arms crossed and his face a mask of defiance. You're making a huge mistake, he said, glaring at Laura. You're ruining my life over lies. Laura met his gaze, her voice steady. We'll let the evidence speak for itself. As she stepped outside, Anders joined her. We've had enough to escalate this case, he said quietly, but we're going to need more to connect the dots, especially about Sarah. Laura nodded, her mind already piecing together a timeline. Delilah's case is officially a criminal investigation now, and if Todd had anything to do with Sarah's disappearance, we'll find out. The two stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the case pressing heavily on their shoulders. Behind them, the Carter house loomed, its tidy facade hiding the secrets within. What do you think happened to Sarah? Did she really leave like Todd said? If so, why did she leave Delilah behind? Share your thoughts below, and if you're eager to find out how the story unfolds, give this video a like and keep watching. The tension from the search warrant lingered like an unspoken weight on everyone involved. Detective Anders sat at his desk, the soft hum of the precinct's overhead lights providing the only background noise. His focus narrowed on a single name that stood out from Laura Jenkins's follow-up report, Emily Mitchell. She had worked for the Carters as a nanny 2 years ago, but left abruptly. Anders leaned back in his chair, his gut telling him she might hold the key to understanding what happened behind the Carter family's polished facade. After making a few calls, he tracked her down to a modest apartment in a neighboring town. Anders pulled his unmarked car to the curb and glanced at Sam Porter in the passenger seat. You sure you want to be here? He asked. Sam nodded. If this can help Delilah, I'll do whatever it takes. The pair climbed the narrow stairs to the second-floor unit. Emily's door opened cautiously after Anders knocked, the security chain still in place. A woman in her late 30s peered out, her eyes shadowed with worry. Miss Mitchell, I'm Detective Anders, he began, holding up his badge. This is Sam Porter. We're investigating Todd Carter and need your help. Emily hesitated, the chain rattling slightly as her grip tightened on the door. I've got nothing to say about Todd Carter, she said curtly. You should leave. Anders leaned closer, his voice lowering. I understand you're scared, but Delilah needs you. She's safe now. But we need to know what you saw while you worked for the Carters. It can make all the difference. Emily's expression softened at the mention of Delilah. After a moment of silence, she unlatched the chain and opened the door wider. Come in, she murmured, her voice barely audible. The small living room was tidy but sparse, suggesting a life of quiet solitude. Emily perched on the edge of her couch, her hands wringing nervously as she avoided eye contact. I left that job for a reason, she began, her voice brittle. Todd, he's not the man people think he is. Anders pulled out his notepad, nodding encouragingly. Take your time. Emily hesitated before continuing. It started after Sarah left, he changed. His temper was always short, but after she was gone, it got worse. Delilah bore the brunt of it. Her voice cracked. He humiliated her, yelling at her in front of me, calling her worthless and a burden. Sam, sitting across from her, clenched his fists but said nothing. Emily's hands fidgeted in her lap. There were times I'd hear Delilah crying in her room, begging to be let out. He'd lock her in there for hours, sometimes overnight, as punishment. When I confronted him, he told me to mind my business or I'd regret it. Anders' pen paused mid-note. What ought Sarah? Did you hear anything before she disappeared? Emily's expression grew guarded. They fought a lot. She wanted to leave, but he wouldn't let her. The last argument I overheard was bad. He was yelling, calling her selfish for trying to take Delilah away. The next week, she was gone. Todd said she left to find herself, but it didn't feel right. As Anders and Sam wrapped up their interview, Emily's face darkened with worry. You can't let Todd know I talked to you, she said. He has a way of making people regret crossing him. You're protected, Anders assured her. But your testimony could be crucial. Will you consider coming forward? Emily hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. If it helps Delilah, I'll do it, but I need anonymity. I can't risk him finding me outside. Sam exhaled sharply as they returned to the car. Hearing Emily describe what Delilah went through was worse than he had imagined. Anders nodded grimly. We're building a strong case, but Todd's the type to fight dirty. He won't go down easily. Later that evening, as Sam finished his route at the bus depot, his co-workers called him over. Hey Sam, there's a guy outside asking for you. one of them said. Stepping out into the dimly lit lot, Sam found Todd Carter leaning against his car, arms crossed and his expression dark. "You've been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong," Todd said, his voice low and menacing. Sam squared his shoulders. "If protecting Delilah means doing the right thing, then yeah, I'll keep sticking my nose in." Todd's face twisted into a sneer. "You don't know anything about my family. You think you're some kind of hero. You're nothing but a bus driver." Sam's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "Delilah deserves better than whatever you're putting her through." Todd stepped closer, his tone icy. "You keep pushing, and you'll find out just how wrong you are." As Todd drove away, Sam stood rooted to the spot, his heart pounding. The encounter left him shaken, but his resolve hardened. Todd was unraveling, and Sam was determined to see justice served. Sam Porter sat in the break room of the bus depot, his untouched coffee cooling in his hands. The chatter of his co-workers faded into the background as his mind replayed Delilah's trembling voice from that fateful morning. The thought of her with a foster family brought some relief, but it didn't erase his growing worry. His phone buzzed, breaking his train of thought. It was Laura Jenkins, the CPS caseworker. "Sam, I thought you'd like an update on Delilah," she said, her voice steady yet cautious. "Is she okay?" Sam asked immediately. "She's adjusting," Laura replied. "The foster mother says she's still quiet, but she's started to open up. She mentioned something significant, a fear her father drilled into her. He told her to never talk about the night Mommy disappeared." Sam gripped the phone tighter. "That poor kid, she's been through hell." Laura's tone softened. "She trusts you, Sam. That morning on the bus, it was the first time she felt safe enough to reach out. That means something." Sam swallowed the lump in his throat. "Thanks for letting me know. Keep me updated." As he ended the call, determination replaced the worry in his eyes. He couldn't let Todd's manipulations overshadow the truth. But Todd wasn't backing down. By midweek, local news outlets were airing segments featuring him on camera, his carefully constructed persona of a grieving father on full display. "They tore my family apart," Todd said to the reporter, his tone laced with indignation. "CPS acted on baseless claims, and now my little girl is in the hands of strangers. And that bus driver? He's been harassing us for weeks. This is personal for him, not about justice." Sam watched the broadcast in disbelief from his living room. He clenched his jaw as Todd's fabricated narrative played out on the screen. The reporter leaned in, their tone sympathetic. "What do you hope to accomplish, Mr. Carter?" "I just want my daughter back," Todd said, his voice breaking. "And I want these people to answer for what they've done to my family." The segment ended and Sam slammed the remote onto the coffee table. The smear campaign was working. He had already received calls from concerned parents questioning his involvement in the case. The accusations stung, but they also fueled his resolve. Todd might control the narrative for now, but Sam had faith that the truth would eventually come out. The next morning, Emily Mitchell arrived at the precinct for her deposition. Her determined expression masked the nerves beneath. Detective Anders met her in the hallway, offering a reassuring nod. "You ready for this?" Anders asked. Emily nodded, gripping her file tightly. "As ready as I'll ever be." In the interrogation room, she recounted her time working as the Carter family's nanny. Her voice was steady as she detailed Todd's escalating anger. Todd would yell at Delilah, calling her names and blaming her for everything. After Sarah left, he locked her in a room for hours, sometimes overnight. Anders leaned forward. "What about Sarah? Did you ever witness anything involving her directly?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "I heard them fighting more than once. One time, Sarah screamed, 'You're going to kill us,' during a particularly bad argument. I reported it, but Todd convinced the responding officers it was just a misunderstanding. That was only days before she disappeared." Emily's voice faltered slightly as she continued. Todd's behavior wasn't just anger, it was control. He wanted everyone in that house to feel powerless. Todd's attorney wasted no time attacking the credibility of the case against his client during the preliminary hearing. He targeted Emily Mitchell's testimony. "My client is the victim of an unwarranted investigation," the lawyer proclaimed, his voice sharp and calculated. "Miss Mitchell's claims are unsubstantiated and based on personal grievances from her time as a disgruntled employee." Detective Anders sat in the gallery, his jaw tight as he listened to the defense attempt to dismantle the case. Emily Mitchell sat nearby, her posture stiff and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Though visibly shaken, her resolve remained firm as the defense's accusations loomed over her. "And what of CPS involvement?" the attorney continued, his tone dripping with disdain. "Miss Jenkins acted recklessly, removing Delilah Carter based on speculation and subjective interpretations rather than hard evidence. Anders leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. They were doing everything they could to paint Todd as a victim. We need something irrefutable, he thought, glancing toward Emily and silently willing her to hold steady against the pressure. The courtroom buzzed softly with murmurs as the attorney pressed on, his confidence evident. Anders clenched his fists, determination burning in his chest. Let them twist the narrative for now. The truth will come out. Back at her foster placement, Delilah sat at the kitchen table with her foster mother, a kind woman named Claire. The room was warm and inviting, the scent of cookies wafting through the air. Claire gently encouraged Delilah to talk, her voice soothing. You don't have to tell me everything, Claire said, but if something's bothering you, I'm here to listen. Delilah fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. After a long pause, she looked up, her voice barely audible. He said I'd go away too if I told. Claire's heart sank, but she kept her tone calm. Who said that, sweetheart, your dad? Delilah nodded, her small hands trembling. He got so mad that night. He and Mommy were yelling, then he told me to go to my room and not come out. Claire placed a comforting hand over Delilah's. You're so brave for sharing this, Delilah. You don't have to be scared anymore. With Laura's testimony and Delilah's statement, the detectives gained significant leverage. Later that evening, Todd sat alone in his dimly lit living room, nursing a drink. The mask of control he'd worn for so long was beginning to crumble. The court's insistence on pressing the case rattled him, and he couldn't shake the growing sense that the walls were closing in. Paranoia churned with his simmering anger, making him increasingly reckless. Detective Anders leaned against the hood of his car, the early morning light casting long shadows across the driveway of the Carter home. The warrant in his hand felt heavier than it should have, not because of its physical weight, but because of what it represented. A final opportunity to uncover the truth. Anders glanced at the team of officers and forensic analysts assembling behind him. We're not leaving until we have something definitive, he said firmly, his voice cutting through the cold air. The front door creaked open as Todd Carter, visibly agitated, stepped outside. His jaw was clenched and his lawyer, a slick-suited man with a calm veneer, followed closely behind. This is harassment, Todd barked, his eyes darting between Anders and the officers. You've already torn my home apart once. Anders approached Todd, holding up the warrant. We have every legal right to be here, Mr. Carter. Step aside. Todd's lawyer raised a hand, his tone measured but sharp. Anything found today will be subject to scrutiny. Don't think for a second we won't fight this. Anders ignored the comment, motioning for the team to begin. As the officers entered, the atmosphere inside the house was eerily still. The pristine rooms were almost too perfect, Anders noted, and the faint scent of cleaning products lingered in the air, a detail that only heightened his suspicion. The team moved methodically, revisiting every corner of the house. Forensic analyst Lisa Grant paused at the basement entrance, her sharp eyes catching a slight discoloration in the edge of the carpet. Detective over here. She called out Anders, descended the steps, joining Lisa as she carefully lifted the corner of the newly installed carpet. Beneath it, faint brownish stains marred the concrete floor. Get a sample, Anders ordered, his stomach tightening. Hours later, Lisa approached him with a grim expression. It's blood. Preliminary analysis suggests it's old, but DNA confirmation will take time. Anders nodded, his expression hardening. We'll wait. As the search continued, another officer found a dusty box shoved behind a stack of paint cans in the garage. Inside was a phone, likely Sarah's. Anders flipped through the phone, its cracked screen showing a series of unsent text messages. Todd, please stop. You're scaring me. I can't keep living like this. Delilah's watching. Please, for her sake. Anders felt a wave of anger rise in his chest. He handed the phone to one of the technicians. Catalog this, every detail. By late afternoon, the team had collected enough evidence to issue Todd's arrest. Anders approached Todd, who was sitting in a living room with his lawyer. The air between them was thick with tension. Todd Carter, you're under arrest for the suspected murder of Sarah Carter, Anders said, his voice steady. Todd shot to his feet, his face twisted with rage. This is insane. He shouted, his lawyer grabbing his arm to restrain him. You have nothing. Sarah left me. She's probably somewhere laughing at all of this. Anders stepped closer, his voice calm but cold. The evidence says otherwise. As the officers escorted Todd to the squad car, a crowd gathered outside, their murmurs punctuated by the click of cameras from curious onlookers. Todd's lawyer trailed behind, loudly protesting the legality of the search, but Anders barely registered it. His focus was now on building an airtight case. In the sterile confines of the interrogation room, Todd sat across from Anders, his defiance unwavering. "You're making a mistake," Todd said, leaning back in his chair. "Sarah was unstable. She left on her own, and you people are desperate to pin this on me." Anders leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "You're right about one thing. We're desperate to get justice for Delilah and Sarah. The evidence in your basement tells a much different story than the one you're spinning." Todd scoffed, crossing his arms. "Evidence? You mean some stains on the floor that could be from anything? You got nothing solid." Anders didn't flinch. "We also found Sarah's belongings in your garage. Her phone has messages that paint a very clear picture of what she was going through." Todd's mask of control cracked for a moment, his lips pressing into a thin line. "She was dramatic," he muttered, "always playing the victim." Anders straightened, his patience wearing thin. "You can keep pretending, Todd, but the walls are closing in." Meanwhile, Sam Porter sat in his bus depot, his mind racing with everything that had transpired. A call from Laura Jenkins broke through his thoughts. "Sam, I think you should know Delilah's been asking to see you," she said. Sam hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Is that even allowed? I don't want to make things harder for her." "She finds comfort in you," Laura replied gently. "Sometimes a familiar face can make all the difference." Later that evening, Sam arrived at the Foster home. Delilah met him at the door, her small frame trembling slightly, but her face lit up with a shy smile. "Hi, Mr. Sam," she whispered. Sam knelt down, his eyes softening. "Hey, kiddo. How are you holding up?" Delilah hesitated before stepping forward and wrapping her arms around his neck. "Thank you for believing me," she murmured. The moment was brief but powerful, and Sam left with renewed determination to see justice served. Back at the precinct, the evidence against Todd was piling up, but his lawyer wasn't going down without a fight. A motion was filed to dismiss the charges, citing supposed irregularities in the search. The legal battle ahead loomed large, but Anders wasn't deterred. "We'll make sure this sticks," he said to Laura, his tone resolute. "Todd's lawyer can delay, but he can't hide the truth." Laura nodded, her gaze steely. "Delilah deserves this. Sarah deserves this." As the team prepared for the next steps, Todd's calm facade began to shatter under the weight of his crumbling lies. The truth was coming, and there was no escape. The investigation reached a pivotal moment when Detective Anders discovered that Todd Carter had sold his car to a junkyard just days after Sarah's disappearance. The timing was suspicious enough to warrant immediate action. With a court order in hand, Anders and a forensic team descended on the junkyard, sifting through rows of derelict vehicles until they located the car. Inside the trunk, faint stains were visible beneath a layer of dirt and grime. A quick presumptive test confirmed the presence of blood. "Bag it," Anders instructed the team, his tone grim. The forensic analysts carefully collected samples, and later lab results confirmed the blood was a match for Sarah Carter. The discovery wasn't just another clue. It was the missing link tying Todd directly to her presumed death. At the precinct, Todd sat in the interrogation room, his demeanor a volatile mix of simmering anger and feigned indifference. The evidence was laid out in front of him: photographs of the bloodstains, forensic reports, and timelines that dismantled his alibi piece by piece. Detective Anders entered the room with Laura Jenkins, their presence a deliberate show of unity. Anders sat across from Todd, leaning forward slightly. "You've got one chance to tell the truth, Todd. We found the car. We found Sarah's blood in the trunk. The lies stop here." Todd's jaw tightened as he stared at the evidence, his nostrils flaring. "You're making this up," he spat, his voice shaking. "This is a setup, a damn setup. You and that CPS lady are working together to ruin me." Laura, standing near the door, kept her tone measured. "No one's fabricating anything, Todd. This is the reality. Sarah didn't vanish into thin air, and you can't keep dodging the truth." Todd's temper boiled over. He slammed his fist on the table, the sharp sound reverberating through the room. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he barked. "This whole thing is a witch hunt. You don't have a shred of proof that I did anything wrong." Anders remained unflinching, his voice calm but firm. "The proof is in that car and in the stories people around you are finally telling. The blood doesn't lie, Todd, and neither do the people you've hurt." Todd's breathing grew erratic, his face flushed as he glared at the photographs in front of him. His facade of control was crumbling. "She wouldn't listen," he blurted, his voice cracking. "She blamed me for everything." "Everything? It was always my fault." Anders leaned in, pressing. "What happened that night, Todd? Did things get out of hand?" Todd slammed his fist on the table again, his voice rising. "I didn't mean to." He stopped himself, his words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. His hands trembled as he buried his face in them. "I didn't mean to kill her," he whispered, his voice muffled and broken. The room fell into a tense silence. Laura exchanged a glance with Anders, the weight of Todd's confession sinking in. Todd didn't look up. His shoulders sagged as he began to sob. The fight drained from him. The confession was both a victory and a tragedy, marking the unraveling of a man who had tried so desperately to hide his crimes. Outside the room, Laura exhaled a shaky breath. "We finally got him," she said quietly. Anders nodded, his expression grim. "Now it's time to bring Sarah home and give Delilah the answers she deserves." Todd Carter's confession marked the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. Under Anders' guidance, a search party ventured into the dense woods behind the Carter home. The air was heavy with tension as officers combed the area, their flashlights cutting through the early morning mist. It didn't take long before they uncovered Sarah Carter's shallow grave. The sight was haunting. Sarah's remains were wrapped hastily in a stained sheet, her body bearing clear signs of struggle. Forensic experts later confirmed the cause of death as blunt force trauma, evidenced by a fractured skull. As the forensic team continued their search of the area, they discovered a crowbar buried nearby. The tool, crusted with dried blood, was sent for analysis. Laboratory results confirmed it was the murder weapon, bearing Sarah's blood and traces of Todd's DNA on the handle. This piece of evidence tied Todd irrefutably to the crime, solidifying the case against him. The discovery of both the grave and the weapon would provide crucial closure for Delilah, but left the team reeling from the tragedy. Even for seasoned detectives like Anders, the weight of the case lingered heavily. It was one thing to suspect a crime, but seeing the tangible evidence of Todd's brutality brought a grim finality to their work. Anders deliberated heavily on how to break the news to Delilah. He understood that the weight of their words would shatter the fragile sense of normalcy she had managed to build in her foster home. After consulting with Laura Jenkins, they decided that honesty tempered with care was the only way forward. When they arrived at the foster home, Anders' usually stoic demeanor was shadowed with unease. He exchanged a glance with Laura before they knocked on the door. Delilah, curious but cautious, greeted them with the same tentative look she always wore when adults approached her with something serious to say. They led her to the living room, her foster mother staying nearby to offer support. Anders stayed back, his large frame almost protective, while Laura knelt to meet Delilah's gaze. Laura began gently, clasping Delilah's small hands. "We found your mom." The words sparked a flicker of hope in Delilah's eyes. "She's okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with both longing and fear. Laura's throat tightened as she hesitated. "No, sweetie," she finally said, her voice trembling. "She passed away. She's gone." Laura's eyes welled with tears as she squeezed Delilah's hands. "I'm so sorry, Delilah. Your mom loved you more than anything. She tried to protect you, and because of her, we were able to stop your dad from ever hurting anyone again." Delilah's chest heaved as the first sob broke free. "No," she whispered, shaking her head furiously. "No, she can't be gone." Anders stepped forward, his voice softer than Delilah had ever heard. "Delilah, I know this is so hard to hear, but your mom would want you to know that you're safe now." The little girl's sobs filled the room, her small frame trembling as she cried into Laura's arms. Her foster mother gently stroked her hair, whispering soothing words. "I just wanted her to come back," Delilah choked out, clutching tightly to the stuffed animals she always carried. Laura, her voice cracking, said, "She'll always be with you, Delilah, in your heart and your memories. She loved you more than anything." Anders turned away briefly, his jaw tightening against his own emotions. As Delilah's sobs slowly quieted into hiccuping breaths, he silently vowed that justice for Sarah and a safe future for Delilah would remain his priority. With Sarah's body recovered, the prosecution began building an airtight case against Todd. The trial was scheduled swiftly, with the weight of public scrutiny adding pressure to the legal teams on both sides. The courtroom was packed on the first day, the palpable anticipation hanging in the air. The prosecution wasted no time presenting a harrowing narrative of Todd's abuse and violence. Forensic evidence took center stage. Photographs of Sarah's grave, DNA analysis of the blood and hair fibers found in Todd's car, and expert testimony linking the injuries on Sarah's body to the weapon Todd had discarded. Todd's chilling confession, in its cold simplicity, was played for the jury, silencing the room as his words echoed through the speakers. The emotional toll of the trial was most evident in Delilah's testimony. Shielded by a partition to block her view of Todd, she sat nervously in the witness chair, clutching a small stuffed animal for comfort. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she recounted the night Todd dragged something heavy into the woods. Her testimony left a visible impact on the jury, many of whom avoided meeting her tearful gaze. Sam Porter, seated in the gallery, clenched his fists, struggling to contain his emotions. Detective Anders, sitting beside him, whispered, "This will be the moment they remember." Emily Mitchell's testimony further cemented Todd's violent nature. She recounted his volatile temper, the verbal and physical abuse she witnessed, and her decision to leave when the danger became too much. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I should have done more." The defense, desperate to counter the mountain of evidence, launched a series of attacks on the credibility of the witnesses. They painted Emily as a disgruntled former employee and questioned Delilah's memories as the imagination of a traumatized child. However, these efforts rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence and the jury's visible discomfort with Todd's behavior. After several days of testimony, the jury was given the case. The deliberation lasted 3 tense days, with the public anxiously awaiting the outcome. On the 4th day, the jury returned with their decision. Todd Carter was found guilty of second-degree murder and child endangerment. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. The verdict was a moment of vindication for Delilah and those who had fought for justice. In the aftermath, Delilah visited her mother's grave for the first time, clutching a simple drawing of herself and Sarah smiling together. She knelt by the headstone and placed it gently against the granite. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I miss you, Mommy." Sam stood a few feet away, giving her space but ready with quiet support. When she turned to him, her eyes filled with both sorrow and gratitude. He offered her a small, reassuring smile. "You're safe now," he said gently. "Your mom would be proud of how strong you are." As Delilah wiped her tears and stood, the weight of her loss mingled with the faint stirrings of hope. The chapter of her father's tyranny was closed, and while the scars would remain, she was finally freed to begin healing. The Parker residence was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, its white picket fence and blooming flower beds exuding a sense of calm that Sam Porter hadn't felt in weeks. He parked his car beside Detective Anders' vehicle and stepped out, joining Anders and Laura Jenkins as they approached the house. Mrs. Parker greeted them warmly at the door, her kind smile setting the tone for the visit. "Delilah's been waiting for you all morning," she said, her voice full of maternal pride. "She's upstairs. I'll let her know you're here." Inside, the home was cozy, filled with soft light and the faint aroma of cookies baking in the kitchen. Sam noticed photographs on the walls, pictures of the Parkers and other children they had fostered over the years. For the first time since meeting Delilah, he felt a sliver of hope for her future. Delilah appeared at the top of the stairs, her tiny frame lost in an oversized lavender sweater. In one hand, she clutched a worn stuffed bunny, its ears frayed from years of comfort. She paused, peering down at the visitors with wide, uncertain eyes. "Hi, sweetheart," Sam said gently, his voice as soft as the smile tugging at his lips. He took a step closer and knelt to her level, his arms open in a silent invitation. For a moment, she hesitated, her grip on the bunny tightening. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, she ran down the stairs and threw her arms around his neck. "Hi, Mr. Sam," she exclaimed, her voice bright and filled with newfound warmth. "I missed you." Sam's throat tightened as he held her close, his large hand gently patting her back. "I missed you too, kiddo," he managed, his voice slightly hoarse. Laura Jenkins and Detective Anders stood by, their faces softening as they watched the exchange. Delilah turned toward them, a small, shy smile creeping onto her face. "Thank you for coming to see me," she said quietly, stepping forward to offer each of them a hug. Her embrace was gentle, but it carried a sincerity that made both Anders and Laura pause. "You're very welcome, Delilah," Laura said warmly, brushing a loose strand of hair from Delilah's forehead. "You're doing so well here. We're so proud of you." Delilah's eyes sparkled with a mix of gratitude and joy. "You're all my family," she said simply, her voice steady, as if she'd been practicing the words in her mind. As Delilah settled onto the couch, she chatted animatedly about her new school and the friends she was making. The contrast struck Sam, Laura, and Anders. The frightened, trembling little girl who had clung to Sam on the bus that morning seemed like a distant memory. Her once panicked eyes now shone with hope, and her tentative smile had bloomed into something full and genuine. The three exchanged a glance, their unspoken thoughts clear. Delilah's resilience reminded them that even in the darkest of cases, there was a chance for light to break through. When it was time to leave, Delilah clung to each of them as if afraid they might disappear. She hugged Laura and Anders quickly but lingered in Sam's arms. "Thank you for everything," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Sam's voice cracked as he replied, "You're welcome. Don't hesitate to reach out if you ever need anything." Outside, the three stood silently by their cars, the weight of the case lingering between them. "Cases like this remind us why we do this job," Anders said, his voice low but resolute. "It's not more than the law. It's about giving people like Delilah a chance." As Sam drove home, the events of the past weeks replayed in his mind. The desperate plea for help, the relentless search for answers, and the heartbreaking discovery of Sarah's fate. Yet amidst the tragedy, Delilah's courage and resilience stood out as a beacon of hope. He glanced in his rearview mirror one last time, catching a glimpse of the Parker house fading into the distance. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to exhale, knowing Delilah was safe, loved, and beginning to heal. In that moment, Sam realized the profound impact of one small act, stopping the bus, listening, and believing. It was a reminder of the quiet power of compassion and the extraordinary outcomes it could inspire. Smiling faintly, he turned onto his street, ready to embrace the peace of his own home, content in the knowledge that he had made a difference. Thanks for watching till the end.